Good evening, everyone. Welcome to February 20th, Architectural Advisory Committee. I need to apologize in advance. I have a bit of a cold and my voice is just barely coming back, so bear with me, please. Can we have a roll call?
Yes, Committee Member Roth.
Present.
Committee Member Tanakasugo.
Present.
Committee Member Stewart.
Here.
Chair Spatone.
Here. So we have, item number 2 is approval of the minutes. I have some. And I do have one comment on the minutes. I think that, I don't believe it was reflected, our concern about the idea of a study session versus sort of a full-blown hearing, if you want to call it that, and our concern about applicants putting in a lot of effort, and I don't know what the other community members feel, but I know there was a lot of angst about the position we were put in to make decisions or to make comments at the same time that the applicant was very far along with their design process.
Yeah, if I may through the chair, it's kind of difficult because it doesn't really fit into the project-specific comments, and it wasn't really an agendized topic for future agenda items, but certainly something we can squeeze in there and update. Kind of maybe forwarding a recommendation with that added into the minutes.
Yeah, maybe the chair's, the advisory committee's recommendation is for study sessions to review projects sooner or something along those lines. Do I hear a motion for those minutes?
So moved as you revised, John?
And a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor? Aye. So that passes 4-0 with recommendations to add that response. So item number 3, public comment on items not on our agenda. Is there anyone here wishing to speak on items not on our agenda tonight? Seeing none, and I have no speaker cards, we'll close that. Item number 4 is consent calendar. We have no items there. And item number 5, action items, none. So we can move on to our study session, which is Stanford Blocks C and Block E.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good evening, committee members of the Architectural Advisory Committee. My name is Anna Miguel, Principal Planner. So as you can see tonight, we will be discussing what we're calling Phase 2 of the Stanford and Redwood City Precise Plan. Just to be clear, Phase 2 includes 2 separate entitlements with 2 separate applicants and 2 separate project planners, but we are bringing them together as a whole as Phase 2 for your early consideration. And so Block C is one entitlement. The applicant is Stanford University, and the project planner is Ryan Kuchnig, Senior Planner. And then Block E, the applicant is Stanford Medical, and I am the project planner. So with that being said, this is the agenda for the staff presentation tonight. I'll go through the context and background for the precise plan, and then what was approved and constructed under Phase 1. Ryan and I will be tag teaming the presentation a little bit, providing an overview on Block C and Block E. Then we'll give you an update on where we are in the review process and what the next steps are. And finally, we'll open it up to questions and discussion. So just a little bit of background on the Precise Plan. In 2013, the City Council adopted the Precise Plan along with a zoning amendment, a development agreement, and a certified program level EIR, mostly for an office campus use with administrative office functions, and then some medical office use permitted. So no teaching and no student classrooms were proposed. I know some of you may have been involved in that process, so you might be familiar, but just a little bit of background on the key goals of the precise plan for those of you that are not as familiar. The emphasis are kind of the key 6 things highlighted here. I'll go through them very quickly. The first is neighborhood compatibility, so focus on traffic management, pedestrian safety, open space improvements, and controls on development. The precise plan discusses campus access and circulation and parking in a lot of detail, so you'll see references to extensions of streets and creating more of a grid for the campus, a transit hub, and then an active transportation demand management program. Building design and orientation so that there's a pedestrian feeling and open for pedestrian movement and cycling. And then in terms of architectural character, the precise plan calls for a coherent campus, but acknowledges that development will happen incrementally, and so there could be some variation in architectural design between buildings. And finally, a focus on environmental sustainability. So this is the Phase 2 site plan, but it incorporates Phase 1 as well. And I'm going to look at my map here because that's too far even with my glasses. So moving from the right to the left, what was included in Phase 1, and just as a reminder, Phase 1 was approved in October of 2016 by the Planning Commission. The city received an appeal. It was brought to the City Council in December of 2016, and the City Council denied the appeal and upheld the Planning Commission decision. And Phase 1 is completed and built, and you may have seen it if you've driven past. So from right to left, it includes buildings B1, B2, B3, and B4, amenity buildings A1, A2, and A3, and then the parking structure P1. The open space adjacent to A1 and the greenway that's between the buildings. And then in terms of Phase 2, so Block C includes buildings B5, B6, amenity building A4, which is just in front of the P2 parking structure, and then the P2 parking structure. And then Block E, north of Broadway, is building B10, that's the medical office building, and then the associated campus loop and 2-story parking structure adjacent to Highway 101. So now I'm going to hand it over to Ryan.
Yes, good evening, Ryan Kuchnig. As Anna mentioned, I will describe Block C. Within Block C of the precise plan, Stanford proposes approximately 2 new 125,000 square foot office buildings for a total of 250,000 square feet, up to approximately 88 feet in height, approximately 5 stories, 16,500 square feet of amenity space, and 1,086 new parking spaces comprised of a 6-level parking structure with 1 level underground. Block C would follow a similar development pattern as Blocks A and B to the east, with office buildings located at the north end of the site, a parking structure, and 1 office building to the south end along Bay Road. A centralized greenway averaging approximately 100 feet would continue through the middle of the site. The full build-out of the precise plan includes Block D to the west, which is not proposed at this time. The current project would extend Hurlingame Avenue between Bay and Broadway. As shown, existing B4 at the northeast corner is shown there. Building B5, which is proposed, is located at the northwest corner at Broadway, and B6 is located at the opposite southeast corner adjacent to Bay and Warrington. The parking structure would be towards the intersection, as you can see, at Bay and Hurlingame. Each building is proposed at near or at the minimum street side setbacks that are allowed per the precise plan. The proposed amenity space within Phase 2 is divided up between floor area within building B6 and a separate 4,000 square foot 1-story building adjacent to the parking structure facing the greenway. An outdoor courtyard, which with decorative paving includes a grove of trees, and that's planned to be located within the parking structure and B6. There's also a outdoor amenity area between B5 and the existing B4. Street improvements such as sidewalk design, lighting, and tree selection for the extended Hurlingham Avenue would match specifications as part of the precise plan. And it is planned to enhance pedestrian crossing across Broadway to connect Block C and Block E, as increased foot traffic is expected between these two blocks. The project architect will describe this in a bit more detail, but I will just state that it is complementary in design and scale is informed to the other blocks with some variation based on their positioning on the site. The buildings are more rectangular in form rather than the L-shaped buildings on Block B. Similarly, though, the buildings are 5 stories with extended roof screening. Consistent with other buildings on campus, each of the buildings utilize a combination of stone, concrete, and insulated glass material within the facade. A terracotta material is also used along the base of the buildings. Various recesses and projections further break up the mass as recommended by the design guidelines in the precise plan. And the plan also specifies maximum building length, which the proposal does plan to meet. And here is some additional renderings, more of the parking structure, which are similar to Block B, as also being 6 levels. There are some interior views here that show kind of the interface of the buildings as well as the greenway. The parking structure would primarily utilize metal paneling and trim as well as steel columns. PV panels would be placed on the roof as well. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Anna for Block E.
Okay, so for Block E, Stanford Medical have proposed a 227,000 square foot medical office building. The precise plan allows for a height up to 150 feet, and I believe they're at about 147 at the plate height, and it's approximately 10 stories. And then I think in the staff report, I accidentally inverted the numbers, so the parking count is 1,107 spaces, not 1,701 spaces. And it's comprised of underground parking underneath the building, a 2-story parking structure adjacent to Highway 101, and then surface lots. So here is the site design for Block E, and the precise plan calls for a street grid layout that identifies an extension of Warrington Avenue. And so prior to the submittal, Stanford Medical had some discussions with staff, and after they submitted, we've discussed a little bit further about allowing for an interpretation that Warrington Avenue, that extension would end at the beginning of the campus loop. What you can't see in the site plan here is that there's an existing medical office buildings on Block F, so to the right of the site, and they wanted to provide a campus loop that would allow for drop-offs and pickups of patients, and then as well as circulation to the parking structures and in and out of the site. And so, staff said that they would be willing to explore and review the Warrington extension as they proposed it, and so that's why you see the site design here. And then in terms of surface lots, the precise plan identifies that new surface lots should be located away from Broadway. And I put an image on the left. This is one of the earlier iterations of the site design. That's actually an existing surface lot that's there today. And what you can't see in the site plan too is that one of the buildings in Block F actually has an exit route from its underground parking structure into that parking lot. So again, some discussion back and forth with staff internally as well as the applicant, and advise them to try and meet the intent of the precise plan to remove some of those surface lots away from Broadway. And so what they proposed here is a pedestrian and cyclist access and extension not only to the medical buildings but also to the rest of the precise plan and some open space. There's still a couple of ADA spaces that will remain there, as you can see, and then it still allows for that exit only from the existing medical office building into the campus loop. The precise plan also calls for a campus landmark, and in the staff report, you'll see an image. It shows the campus landmark being at the very end of Warrington Avenue, and that's like right up against Highway 101. And actually, staff did a couple of site visits out to the site, and if the project is entitled, it would essentially be in between two parking structures, and it's quite noisy from Highway 101. So we discussed with the applicant exploring some maybe more appropriate places for the campus landmark to be. And so discussed a couple of iterations, potentially the building itself being the campus landmark. Ultimately, what you see here is the campus landmark proposed in the campus loop. And just to give you a little bit more indication from the precise plan, it says that it should be architectural in character with forms and materials that complement the buildings. And potential options could include a fountain, a pavilion, a clock, a floral garden arrangement, and a form of public art that is focused and a memorable image encourages the use. So not a ton of detail in the precise plan, but what Stanford Medical has proposed is a serpentine wall within that campus loop and some really large, mature live oak trees. And just to give a nod to where the precise plan indicates the campus landmark should be, they've also proposed a large, mature coast live oak adjacent to Highway 101 in between the two parking structures. I'm not going to talk about the architectural and building design in a lot of detail because the applicant has a presentation for you tonight, but just to quickly reiterate that the precise plan identifies that the buildings should all be coherent, but recognizing that development will happen incrementally and that each individual building will have some differentiation in architectural design. And so the proposed materials include French limestone, red terracotta, board frame concrete, glass, a lot of glass as you can see, aluminum extrusions, fins, and perforated metal panels. There are some samples on the table there too for you to see. So in terms of timeline and where we are in the review process, as you can see, we're really at the beginning of the review process. As I said, Block C and E are separate applications, and so they've been moving a little bit in separate intervals, still working on their completeness review with staff. And so this felt like an appropriate time to bring it very early on in the stage, but allow for Block C to catch up a little bit in their submittal process with E before bringing it as a whole as phase 2. So currently in the completeness review as well as the design review, and looking for your preliminary feedback tonight. And then after that, it will go through environmental review. And just as a reminder, that environmental review will really just be a consistency check against the program level certified EIR for the precise plan, making sure what is proposed is consistent with what was studied in 2013. And then eventually the entitlement public hearings will consist of, we'll bring back a recommendation to the Architectural Advisory Committee, and then Planning Commission would take the final action on the project. So with that, there's not really a staff recommendation tonight. We ask that you review the project design, provide preliminary feedback to the applicants in a study session format. Here are some potential topics for discussion, and Ryan and I are available for any questions that you might have. Just note that the applicants are present tonight. They have full teams here tonight, so they're available to answer any questions, and they've actually combined their presentation into one as a phase 2 concept.
Thanks. Any questions for staff at this time? Thank you.
Well, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
You said that some topics for discussion. Do you have a number of items that you would like to?
Yeah, so really, the kind of topics are laid out here, so just some design and layout, building design and the proposed building materials, and then I highlighted the campus landmark here because I don't think the precise plan gives a terrible amount of detail on what it really should be and what your interpretation is, and so I think that the AAC could provide some really good input there. And then, of course, just on the Warrington extension, if you wanted to provide comments there too on that interpretation.
No questions for me.
Any other comments?
Thanks. So I guess we can hear from the applicants, plural.
Make sure we get the PowerPoint up. It's okay. Great. Thank you. Good evening. My name is David Lennox. I'm a Stanford University architect. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank you in advance for your time and comments on our design and architecture for Phase 2, Stanford Redwood City. And for the most part, I think what you're going to see is that we've built upon lots that we learned in Phase 1 to make this even a better phase and a consistent campus. I'm going to give you a high-level view of how we've been thinking about the campus as a whole, focus a little bit more on Block C, and then hand it over to my colleague George Tingwald to talk about Block E. As mentioned, we have brought a lot of resources here for any specific questions you may have in the PC submittal for either Block C or Block E. We have Stanford representation as well as design consultants and teams here as well. So Stanford envisioned coming to Redwood City almost 20 years ago. They had a vision to build a campus here. And we worked very closely on the entitlement, on the precise plan, developed guidelines that we all felt comfortable with, both the city staff and Stanford as well. And these visions and guidelines that you see up on the screen really grounded our work. And to me, they're almost also a way or a metric to evaluate how successful the campus is and what we can do to improve it. And so it's really been important. For me, I think the guideline about creating a campus that really captures the ethos of Stanford was really one of the most important things we could do. We're moving over 2,500 of our staff just to the South Broadway part of campus, and we wanted to make sure that they felt comfortable, they felt that sense of higher purpose, that they really felt that this was Stanford. And so we were encouraged by our Board of Trustees to really make this a great place to work. They had their meeting here actually in December in Cardinal Hall, toured the campus again, and I think they left very confident that we really did find a way to commit to the excellence and the character and the ethos of what we have on our main campus. The dedication was last year, and really this campus captures a lot of what happens on our main campus. The architectural kit of parts, everything from the way the buildings meet the ground, the base, the arcades or the wood ceilings, direct connections to the landscape, the use of the buff-colored limestone, the use of terracotta, which really pays homage to our terracotta clay tile roofs, using trellises for both scale as well as shade, and even cardinal red accents. We felt very strongly, and we talked about this when we came to this commission last time, that we want this to be a family of buildings, not an office park of matching buildings. And so when you start to look at the differentiation, even within the office buildings, but more particularly looking at the amenity buildings like the Wellness Center, our child care facility, the dining pavilion, I think you see a little bit more contemporary design coming through, a little bit more of a sculptural modeling, as well as materials that really help to sort of spark and provide some energy to the campus fabric. The landscape from Sanford Commons, which is the open accessible park at the end, wide swaths of recreational grass, really weaves nicely into the campus promenade and even integrates the more working parts of the landscape, the bioswales. As we get to use the landscape to reinforce placemaking, one of the things we like to do on campus is really look at a variety of ways to make place. We look at it from many different perspectives, but in this case, this is an example slide of tailoring the energy levels. So high energy in the Stanford Square or in the dining pavilion, the flexible open ceiling, to the medium energy spaces you might find between Discovery Hall and University Hall, for example, that might be a little bit more about professional work. and then also the recreation and passive and restorative spaces. And so trying to dial up that variety on the campus is really important as well. And I think as our Stanford users, but also the neighborhood and the community begin to explore how to use these spaces, we're paying very close attention. We want to see if we can find that perfect recipe of being able to activate these spaces in the right way. And it's more than just flexible tables and chairs or warm wood benches or even integrating art in the landscape. It's about really managing the program, and we learn every day of what's working and what's not going to work and how to improve upon it. And I think it's really a layering over time that will make this a spectacular, vibrant campus. In the staff report, we did go over existing, just to reiterate, Block A, Block B are existing parts of the campus today, and a portion of Block C, which is Cardinal Hall, the cafe, and Stanford Square. And so our architectural review and commentary today would be really for Block C, the remainder of development, as well as Block E. And a real important aspect of the precise plan is that every time we bring forth a phase, we need to show how the rest of the site will balance from an entitlement standpoint with square footage as well as parking. And so we imagine someday that Block D could house 3 more office buildings and an additional parking structure. And just to remind ourselves, the precise plan stipulates that all the parking structures are to be along Bay Road. As we look at that long-range vision, placemaking, again, we continue that idea. The big red square in the middle is Stanford Square. It's meant to be the heart, the hub, the entrance to campus from Broadway, and really is meant to serve both the south side of Broadway as well as the north side. So if we focus a little bit on Block C, this is a massing axonometric as if I was floating above Broadway, looking back at campus. And one of the most important attributes of the precise plan is that the tallest building should be towards the center of campus. So Cardinal Hall, you see there, is built today. It's 6 stories, and it will be the tallest building south of Broadway. B5 and B6 will step down to 5 stories each, about 75 feet tall. And then the parking structure, P2, will step down even further. That's about the same height as the existing parking structure today. And then the amenities pavilion, you see A4 is 1 story. And I'm sure, you've been reviewing the elevations in the packet, but what I want to do in the next 5 or 6 slides is bring it to life a little bit more. And so I want you to take a moment and just imagine you are getting off the Caltrain and getting on a bike and riding down Broadway to this campus, coming down Broadway to Stanford Square, and you turn right onto Warrington. And this is the view you would have. To the left is University Hall. You can see the arcade with the wood ceiling. To the right would be Stanford Square, Cardinal Hall, and a dining pavilion. And a bit further down Warrington, to the left is the Wellness Center, and to the right is the proposed building B6. And I want you to especially note that the leading corner of B6, the mass, reflects the mass of the Wellness Center. They really have a dialogue with each other. They both have a base. One is transparent, so you can be on the treadmill and watch people in the campus promenade. The other will be made of terracotta. So if I park my bike here and I walk a little bit further towards the campus promenade, we get our next view, and I look to my right down the promenade, and I see again the leading edge of B6, a little more definition of the limestone, the cardinal red under part of the lid, as well as the vertical fins, help to really complement the terracotta inserts on Cardinal Hall on the right-hand side of the slide. So we didn't want to do it exactly the same, but we want to make sure again that they have that dialogue. I will now cross Warrington and move down the promenade, and I look to my left, and there is B6, the plaza that connects B6 with the parking structure. I think what's important about this is what we did in Phase 1 parking structure was to really feature the stair. So in this case, we're also doing the same. It's a sculptural component. It's got some color. It's got some form. It helps to mitigate the scale of a parking garage, but it also encourages people to use the stair as an alternative way to get up to their car versus an elevator. You can start to peek through the landscape on the right-hand side of the slide and see the one-story amenity pavilion. If we walk a little further to the right down the promenade and look back, you can now look at that amenity pavilion. And we think this is going to be important as a way to activate that side of the campus promenade, but to also help mitigate the scale of the parking garage itself, and also bring an amenity and a program to campus that may complement what we have there today. If I now go back out Warrington to Bay Road, this is the intersection of Bay Road and Warrington, and to the right of the screen would be the Wellness Center. And what you see with B6, this proposed building, is that leading corner is really high-quality limestone. Really holds the corner nicely. The terracotta base wraps the corner. And the building can't for a couple of reasons. One is it follows the line of Warrington. It invites you in with its form, but it also helps to mitigate the scale. Because these aren't L-shaped buildings and they're a little bit more rectangular, that cant really helps to provide a little bit of a scale break for us. If I look to the left-hand side of the slide, I see the parking garage that's proposed, and you can see also how the scale of the massing is mitigated. In fact, I'm going to walk down now Bay Road and look back at that parking garage. And you can see how the modulation, which is a pretty rigorous part of the precise plan to help break down the scale of facades, really helps to make this project or this parking garage almost like a compelling building. And that opens up the corner, more landscape, but also the playfulness, the panels that will be similar to what we have in an existing parking garage will make Bay Road even more activated than it is today. I'm now going to walk up Hurlingham, which is the road right here to the left of the slide, back up to Broadway, and I'm going to turn around and look at the proposed building B5. And again, the leading corner, high-quality limestone wrapping the base with terracotta. And you can start to see as you move down Broadway, so this is B5, Cardinal Hall's the next building, University Hall, Discovery Hall. Again, the family of buildings, they're not all exactly alike, but they do have the same architectural kit of parts. So we're really excited about Block C. I think we have built on some of the best practices and architectural moves that we found more helpful in Phase 1. We changed it up just a bit to provide some interest as well. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague George Tingwell to talk a little bit about Block E.
Good evening. We go this way. Can you hear me? Okay. My name is George Tingwald, and I'm the Administrative Director of Medical Planning at Stanford Healthcare. I'm a doctor and I'm an architect, and I also have worked on this campus for 13 years, so I bring a unique perspective to this project. In the precise plan, Block E was program neutral, so designing to provide medical office use within these parameters is our goal. Stanford Healthcare's proposal on Block E, which is adjacent to our existing Block F, includes a 228 square foot medical office building with integrated parking, a freestanding 650 stall parking structure along Highway 101, and a new campus entry loop that provides clear wayfinding to patients and visitors and ties together Block E and F to create a cohesive entry that has 4 elements to it: the entry to the Block F clinics, the 2 parking structures, and entry to the new Block E piece. Our material kit of parts is a little different than what Dave described because we are trying to unite 2 architectural identities. Block F, the existing Stanford Healthcare campus, we inherited from Excited Home. It's a building from the 1990s, series of 4 buildings. and is composed of light-colored metal panels and glass with external shading elements. The Stanford University campus, as Dave described, is composed of limestone, terracotta, and wood. The material language of the building we're proposing is highly contextual, and it responds to the three primary neighbors next to it: Stanford University, Block F, and Highway 101. The massing of the building has three key elements to it: a three-story podium with an internal promenade connecting the main entry to the secondary entry to the building at the ground level. It has a tower element that cantilevers over the main entry and creates a covered drop-off, and an energy screen, which drapes over the tower and gives the building a signature architectural expression. Okay. In our visioning process, one of Stanford Healthcare's key guiding principles has been that the patient and family experience will guide program development and facility layout. This is a series of vignettes that were developed early in the design process, and they show the visiting patient experience, from arrival in the neighborhood to navigating the site to entry to the building. The patient experience has been at the center of visioning for this medical office building, and now I'd like to take you through that experience. We begin with the view of the building from the Highway 101. The building creates a new campus presence, a destination along 101. The dappled white metal energy screen wrapping the east and west sides of the building tower is a distinctive visual marker along the highway, and together with the red terracotta edges accentuates projections on the building. Signage for the building will actually be on the garages rather than on the building itself. I'd like to point out in this slide, in the corner, you see the submittal entry from the original planning submittal. We're showing modifications of this garage. This is still within design, and we do want your comments related to how this element of the building and whole campus works, okay? We've turned the corner off the freeway. We're on Broadway now. As we approach the building from the west, we see the consistency of material context with the buildings across the street, drawing from the kit of parts in Stanford Phase 1, including terracotta at the ground plane, limestone at the podium of the building, and textured precast with terracotta setbacks at the two elevator cores. You also see the wellness floor roof terrace at the fourth level, and it responds and faces over Stanford Square. Okay. Then we go around Warrington Oval, and we approach the building with a view of the drop-off. You see the red terracotta ground plane, which leads visitors from both Broadway and the parking structure to the main building entry. You see terracotta and wood highlighting the pop-outs on the north facade, breaking down this mass of the building on this side. You see the energy screen that drapes over the building to the double-height main lobby below. And you see the metal screening on the integral garage section related to the language of the energy screen. So on the building, there is parking below the building, but there's also four levels of parking above grade at this back side of the building. Okay. We're now looking at the arrival court, a little closer in scale. It shows the plaza for outdoor waiting spaces for our visitors. It shows the building cantilever, which clearly identifies the location of the front door for patients and families. The underside of the cantilever, following the language of the university side, has a welcoming appearance. It offers excellent lighting, both day and night, and protection from the elements, and a seamless flow into the lobby of the building itself. From the entry, we get a sense of the pedestrian experience. We have a view of the landmark landscape consisting of live oak trees, the serpentine wall, and the undulating topography that gives a unique character to this open space, uniting the entire North Campus along the Warrington Extension and going all the way through to Highway 101. Here we have some study views of the southwest corner of the parking structure, the one you'd experience when arriving around the campus loop. We are exploring the notion of a green screen wall at that entry element, a terracotta elevator tower core, and a brow covering the stairways, as well as extending the photovoltaic element with that brow at the roof plane. The next series of studies of the parking structure along 101. And again, these are studies. We look at the elements of the building, which include a playful facade with metal panels that draw the language of the central utility hub and the parking structures on the university side together as a unified element around the entire campus. And we're designing to accommodate the future of photovoltaics on the building rooftop and seeing how that would work both initially or if they come on at a later time in the project. In closing, I'm showing you a view from Stanford Square. The new medical office building completes the north edge of Stanford Square to form a defined urban plaza at the heart of the Stanford campus. It complements the Stanford Square view, and you see the elevation along the west side of Warrington. You see the scale, materiality, and composition of proposed buildings B6, the existing Cardinal Hall and Cardinal Square, and the proposed medical office building, creating a unified street frontage. And that concludes our presentation today, and we look forward to your feedback.
Thank you. Questions to the applicants at this point? Did I see in some of the documents given to us that there was maybe some contemplation of rescreening the existing parking structure along 101? It looked like one of the renderings had a similar treatment for both parking structures. I didn't see it now.
That's been part of our study of that garage. We're not showing it in this submittal because it's not part of the buildings being proposed under this submittal, but we are trying to look at how we're going to express those two garages and bring unity between them. And there may actually be additional garages along 101 as part of the precise plan. So we're really trying to look at materiality that can bring those garages together as we develop them.
Thank you. Any other questions of the applicant?
That garage that you're speaking about now, is that the one that has the floors that are sloping?
Precisely.
Yeah, that always makes me uncomfortable when I drive by it. I don't know why.
I think
I'm sure it's very efficient to do it that way because you don't have a separate ramp. The ramp's actually in the floor.
correct. I think
So it's probably really efficient compared to something with a separate ramp.
Right. The depth of this parking requirement, the 200 feet setback in the precise plan, is a very difficult dimension to do a parking structure. You have to put the ramp on one side or the other.
Right.
It isn't centralized. And as far as access for our patients, we like to have the flat element towards where the patients are going, towards the building, which gives us this situation we're trying to deal with. And we're, again, we want your comments, et cetera, on how we respond to that issue.
I think a screen would be a really good idea. Unfortunately, I've had to go to, I think it's 450 Broadway quite a bit because I tore my Achilles tendon and I've been going in and out of that building to PT and that Excited Home building. I really like it, you know. I don't know, it's just so open and the corridors being on the outside of the building. I know that's probably not very efficient.
It's actually a very similar layout that's what's proposed to the new building here. Yeah.
It's a really comfortable building, so.
Other questions?
I'm curious about the material, the metal soffit with wood texture film. Is that to have a printed wood pattern on the metal?
Yes. I think the issue is if we do this in wood and we have the continuity of the exterior to the interior, as the facility ages, you will see a difference between those two materials. This is a very common way to do an exterior wooden roof element, is to actually do it, and there's very high-quality materials now. It's very hard to tell the difference between the two.
So I was also going to ask you to remind me where it's occurring. So this is up at the roof?
Yes,
I see.
this occurs on the soffits at both the cantilever level and pretty much everywhere where we overset. Tim, you want to
see.
say anything more about that?
Can you hear me?
Can you grab the mic, please?
Yeah, I'll say, you might have noticed on the southern facade, which is where the waiting rooms are, because as George mentioned, the circulation is along the edge of the building. The waiting rooms are on the southern edge, and we were hoping that there wouldn't be the need to pull the blinds and block the views in those, so there are projecting balconies that create shade at those waiting rooms. So the underside of those balconies are that material, as is, to reflect the soffit in the lobby as well. And I'll also note that because this is a high-rise building, technically under the code, it does limit the use of flammable materials. So we wanted to be able to bring a level of warmth to those, but a level of non-combustibility as well. So.
Thank you. I'm not sure if this is a question or a comment, but if we could get clarification on how the landmark element in the landscape fulfills the requirements of, how do you see it complementing the buildings or working with the building forms and materials? If that's not too broad of a question.
Sure.
Please.
I'll field that, and then Simon, our landscape architect, can chime in. As George was saying, the patient experience is super essential to the development of this. And in order to best facilitate the arrival sequence, we arrived at that oval configuration of the roadway, which inherently, just due to the geometry, makes a kind of focal point and an orientation point at the middle of campus. So the question was, what was going to be in that oval? So we've introduced a serpentine wall element that varies in height. That'll be a warm, layered concrete material, not unlike rammed earth in its appearance. That the topography stacks against, and the planting is variegated along the length of that wall, and that supports some mature oak trees that will be planted in there, which combined with the understory planting will be kind of reminiscent of the kind of archetypal California hillside landscape, the golden grasses and the oak. Now, in concert with Anna and talking with planning, one element of the feature landscape was its accessibility to the public. And so to complement this visual feature, we've developed spaces around the perimeter of the oval, which are accessible to pedestrians. So there's a fountain element in the front plaza. There's this feature oak tree that is between the two parking structures along Highway 101. And then we've replaced the surface parking along Broadway with an extension of this landscape vocabulary. That is the oaks and the flowing lines, although here the flowing lines are paths working through the landscape that connect the sidewalks of Broadway and the pedestrians on those sidewalks in a smooth way back to the building entrances, both at the new building, the MOB on Pavilion E, and the existing buildings on Block F.
Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions?
No.
Thank you. We can open this to a public hearing. Is there anyone here wishing to speak on these items? I have no speaker cards. Seeing none, we can close the public hearing and move into discussion. Who would like to start?
If I may, John.
And I think in this case, since it is a working session, maybe we can have a conversation as long as we don't. Normally, we try and do response, close the hearing, but I think in this case, we're asking for a working session, so I think it'd be appropriate if you have specific questions or if the applicant would like to respond, I think it would be appropriate.
I think it'd be very
at
appropriate.
At this time, so to keep things moving.
Couple of things. When we looked at this project a number of years ago as a master plan, the amazing central green space spine through the project, there were some concerns at that time about public, private being the medical facility needs, and there was, I recall something about maybe certain areas would be fenced off. So I'm curious to know how the current open space through the center of the project has functioned, not just for Stanford, but also for the community. And were some of the concerns that were being expressed at that time of maybe the need to create some separation or maybe some interface spaces that shouldn't be so open, if there were possible concerns with that, or have these concerns not been non-existent, or if there have been any problems? I'm just very curious.
And to those speaking to the mic, if they could state their name for the record, please.
Sure. My name is John Donahoe. I was involved in the original master plan, so I may be a familiar face to some of you. And I'm actually in a building that looks over the new open space. So I would point out at this point, we've only really been occupied since about August of last year. So we're still kind of growing into the space. I'm pleasantly surprised to see the community is already using the common greenway. There's a lot of dog walking, and so far everyone's doing what they're supposed to do when they walk their dog, which is good. And I think it does add a nice kind of element. The park itself took a little longer because that was the last thing that we finished and got the fencing down. I think the community is now just kind of starting to discover it a little bit. The greenway itself, the promenade, I am seeing a lot of people running and jogging through the greenway and then into the park and then back around, which was hopefully, that was our intent, was to use it, have it link to the fitness center. So I would say so far so good. We haven't, obviously haven't been a full year yet, but I think all indications have been very positive.
Great, thank you. Sure. And then my other comment is about the architecture and the palette or the manner in which you discuss these buildings being a family. And I think the design looks, I think it's been very successful. And my only comment related to that is the identity of the entries at the pedestrian level. I think that the overall site concepts, the vehicular, pedestrian parking interfaces and everything are really well thought out. It's just that once I'm wheeling somebody up to the building, it's such a clean facade, except for maybe some small sign that says entrance. How am I going to know that this is where the entrance is? So maybe some attention at some point at a more detailed level might.
You're referring to the office buildings at this?
Office buildings, yeah.
For this comment, or the medical buildings as well?
The medical buildings, the elevations of the number of the buildings. I was looking at, I think, B6 and B5. I have less concern about the MOB, but B6 and B5. They're very clean buildings, really nice lines. So.
Justin Brooks from ZGF Architects. I think one way we're working to identify that clarity of entry is through the use of shadow and depth. Both of the B buildings have moments within their upper sort of form and body that are represented through balcony. So there's a break in the larger facade. The intent is that that break is visible from some distance as a bit of a beacon. As you draw closer to the building, there's increased depth in the form of arcades, which is a feature of Stanford's main campus and certainly a feature of this new campus that really are intended to identify those moments where there's physical engagement, i.e. entry. So within the courtyard space between B6 and the parking garage 2, that's a largely arcaded space, and there is intended to be fairly broad porosity through those spaces. There are pre-function spaces and outdoor functioning spaces. So that begins to identify that porosity into that space. On the Warrington elevation, there is an element of arcade that defines the building entry, and again, it's the use of that shadow and depth, i.e. a porch that's intended to really draw you in. I think as we continue to work on the project, looking at that hierarchy is something we can continue to do.
So I was going to say appreciated a couple of these corners, like the southeast corner of B6 and the northwest corner of B5 now, that very nice and clean without any fenestration, kind of giving the initial clue that that's not where the pedestrian goes, or that's not where the entries are, and your eyes drawn down the block to where there's more articulation and depth, different layers of the facade. So I feel like there are clues at least from when we're approaching the building.
Excuse me. I just wanted to say I appreciate the terracotta and the wood to warm it up, because without those elements in the red, I think it would just be pretty cold feeling, and this has a warmth to it that I think is going to be great. And it's down at the pedestrian level, a lot of it gives it a base. I don't know if I would have made the connection with the Spanish tile roof, but sounds good.
I'd like to thank all of you for a wonderful presentation, a well-presented project, and adherence to the specific plan. A couple of questions. For some reason, that the new buildings, not so much the medical office building, but the other two buildings, appear to be less colorful. And maybe it's just the renderings themselves. I'm not sure if the proportion of the use of the terracotta and other colored materials in the limestone is different, but for some reason in the renderings presented, they feel somewhat stark. And I don't know if it's just how we're reading this, or if there has been a change, a conscientious change in the amount of accent materials versus neutral materials. Could you maybe speak to that?
I'm Justin Brooks from CGF Architects. What we've chosen to do in the continuation of this architecture, sort of the kit of parts, is really use the terracotta elements, as you well noted, at the ground plane as accent and identity for building entry. So the terracotta that is represented on the table in the sort of textured format has a richness, which to us is something you want to be up close to, something that's tactile and something that's at sort of the human scale, as opposed to the much larger sort of macro scale of the building. In this case, what's different, what you're seeing that's a little bit different than the Phase 1 buildings, is that material, which in Phase 1 is distributed across the broader building facades, is really focused in those areas where people are coming into contact with the building. So where there is entry inside and out, again, those sort of arcade spaces, but also drifting up through the building in vertical elements such as the exterior stairs. The other place where we're using color, which is a little bit different than the Phase 1 project, is in the sort of highly glazed but with deep curtain wall fins around the top of the building, which help to define essentially an attic story with the intent of bringing down the building scale and really sort of isolating or highlighting the element at the corner of the Greenway and Warrington. So that as well has color, the red color, and then again under the roof lids. So in terms of proportionality, I would say the proportions are similar if we just looked at it quantitatively. It's a different deployment of the color, so rather than being a bit more distributed across the facade, it's really being used to bring forward the massing and the formal breakup and highlight interaction with the building at the ground plane.
Those were earlier renderings we're looking at, so I think if you could flip back to some of the ones that we presented, you're looking at some.
If you could, at the mic, please.
I can speak to that. So so the renderings that were presented in the staff report are an iteration or two old. The renderings in the package, the second submission package, are yet an iteration older, normal, because we're in a design process. That's why we're here for your feedback in the process. But we have increased the quantities of sort of red terracotta at the ground plane, certainly in this image, as well as the sort of break between the building mass represents the use of red as well. Visible here just to the left, we're in a fairly oblique view, so we're seeing it, kind of as a ribbon moving through. And again here, the use of color exists entirely at the ground plane, so that's all terracotta, wrapping up over that volume that faces the greenway over up onto the 5th floor as a defining element to break down building scale. Yeah, the fins across the top.
I applaud the future implementation of photovoltaic panels in the parking structures. I was noticing on the aerials renderings, the large roof areas of like B6 and some of the other buildings. Are there thoughts in the future of utilizing that space for PV, and if so, would that necessitate the tilting of panels in order to optimize the orientation? And if that were to be the case, given the lovely clean lines of the roof as we see it now, are we going to see raised panels or tilted panels that should maybe be hidden behind a screen?
Hi, David Lennox again. One of the things we've been trying to do on our main campus is to look at renewable energy more holistically. And so we have been building solar farms in the Mojave Desert. And when we complete our next one, our campus as a whole will be 100% renewable electricity power. And we will have reduced our greenhouse gases by 80%. And so we tend to look at photovoltaics a little less about building by building and more about the big picture and how you buy and purchase your electricity, as well as how you really leverage renewables when you can do, we're doing 100, I think a first phase solar farm is 155,000 panels, which is a much bigger hit than trying to fit them in between mechanical systems on the roofs. So we do look at that, but often look at the bigger picture about electricity. Hope that helps.
And that being said, on the medical office site, I'm wondering if the building itself won't shadow that parking structure, especially during the winter time, and make those panels not very effective. It'd be worth checking that, since the building is so much taller.
Should I respond?
Sure.
I realized I didn't say my name before, and you guys are like, who is this guy? Anyways, Tim Morsehead, WRNS, architect on the on Block E. Yeah, we've done a shadow study, and there's sufficient distance between the medical office building and the photovoltaic, such that through the majority of the power generating year, there's no shadow effect, and then there's a very limited shadow effect in the depth of winter. We're planning the roof surfaces of both buildings to be PV ready, in recognition of the fact that it's just a responsible thing to do for the future.
And I appreciate the description of the massing of how the medical office building came together and the orientation, and the fact that the main mass is actually set back from Broadway to give a little bit of relief. I think that all works really well. And I absolutely applaud the idea of creating the circle drop-off system as opposed to a dead-end street that was originally proposed in the master plan idea or the specific plan. And it seems almost humorous to look back at creating some sort of a vertical element down right along the freeway when everything is so horizontal and so speed-oriented, and that the buildings themselves become much more prominent than any kind of sculptural element that you would put out between parking structures. So I think the direction is great. That being said, I'm not sure I'm buying the Live Oak California landscape idea just because it feels so contained and so captured, if you will. I almost think that that's, to me, California oaks and rolling landscape needs way more space than that can be provided there. But from a planning point of view, I think the direction is really well thought out as an organizing element. And I applaud removing as much parking as you can from the Broadway side of things, so your impression as you enter will be that of a landscape drop-off. I don't know if I have any suggestions on what that sculptural element could be, but I'm not sure that, as I said, the California landscape idea or approach is working, in my opinion. Almost the P2 parking structure back on Block C almost seems a little complicated in my mind. It has a whole lot of things going on about it, which I think is good that it's a building, but sometimes I think it could be, some of those elements could be, I probably get hit by everybody around me, but some of those elements I think could be reduced and be less complicated. That being said, I think the idea of taking the screening for the medical office building parking structure and creating a false facade so we can avoid the ramping and creating that moving texture along the freeway of varying depths, I think would be a good one. And I would love to see it across the existing parking structure if there's some way to tie those two together in a running fence kind of idea. With maybe some break or some accent that happens between them so that the existing parking structure doesn't feel like it just sunk into the mud, which it currently has that feel to it. So, and I think even though the massing is extremely large for the medical office building, I think the way it's been detailed is highly sophisticated and really evokes this feeling of crisp modernism in a medical office space, which I think is good.
You know, John, to your comment about the green space between the two parking structures along 101, I'm not seeing any real pedestrian orientation going back between the two parking structures.
I agree.
No, so there's a visual thing, but really how, it's a very small space in relationship to the two structures. I'm kind of wondering if the oval, which is a really lovely piece of circulation, and it also is this really nice scale. I mean, it's really large. Would that not be possibly a better location for a focus of some type, seeing as how it would be seen by however many people, and it's also physically the center of something, instead of something being the backdrop up against a freeway?
Absolutely. I think the focus should be the oval and that the backdrop should be the freeway. I mean, if anything, you want to screen off the noise and the distraction of the freeway.
Yeah, I mean, that backdrop just has images to me of paper being blown up against it and trapped in the bushes and the landscaping. I just sort of forgotten, whereas this lovely, huge, low oval that is central to that particular block as a unifying element, just seems like a natural.
Yeah. I think, as Anna said earlier, we're trying to respond to the language in the precise plan, which is not very specific. And I think we entirely agree with you that that location of the landmark along the freeway really needs to be pulled in. So I think that's the direction we're hearing tonight.
Yes. And I think, if anything, the landmark could be almost a running horizontal statement of the parking structures, because it in itself could be a very contemporary expression of metal screening that, running fence, and it could be a very simplistic expression, and then not try and do some architectural element in between them.
But I think the beauty of having that much of a larger physical palette that you can work with gives you a lot more freedom and flexibility. And I think it still meets the intent of the specific plan.
Which is to create a destination at the end of Hurlingame Avenue, right?
Right.
Right.
So I'll say I agree with many of John's comments. The buildings are wonderful, the use of materials, the way the masses are broken down. And it didn't occur to me until John pointed out that the garage has a lot of good moves going on, but maybe too many. Like, it could still be very successful without all that complexity to it, if you choose.
So any other comments from any particulars about that we can send them off with?
I guess the center of the oval could be a reference to the farm, right? The Stanford farm. And I don't know if it's a crazy idea to have like a windmill or something. Something moving, I don't know.
Now, there was a windmill in another part of another project that they wanted to move over. I don't think we want to do
No,
that, John.
no, I'm not saying,
I'm just
I'm not
kidding.
saying that an old windmill, I'm saying some kind of a contemporary windmill that would actually create energy. I don't know. It just seems like it's so low scale that you're not going to see it from anywhere except when you drive up to it. So, I don't know, it's just a crazy idea, I guess.
It's calm and soothing, but I think it should be studied more. Because the buildings are so powerful, and I'm looking for maybe a more thoughtful or a stronger counterpoint to the buildings.
Frank Lloyd Wright's
No ideas.
windmill at Taliesin.
It's probably for sale.
Everything's for sale. It's no more school anymore.
You're right.
Going back to the parking structure and the vocabulary of the newest proposal, and the thought of what might be done to the existing parking structure along the freeway, I think with your palette of elements that you've created for the richness of this campus, that you can find, I'm sure you'll be able to figure out how the proposed design of your current parking structure might apply to the existing one along the freeway, as well as the one that might be there in the future. And within those
Is that something we
vocabularies.
can ask, I wonder? Because, I mean, it isn't part of this project, actually, but
But it's a study session, and it does relate to it, right?
absolutely.
So, I mean, it's really crazy that the expression of a building's function in ramps should be so visually uncomfortable, but it is. It'd be nice to be able to see if we can't bring that particular elevation in line with the richness of everything else you've done on this campus.
If I may, through the chair, if the question is whether or not that can be included as part of the architectural permit, yes, it could. If the applicant chooses to propose
So
them
the-
simultaneously.
The inset image that we're looking at in this picture, is that looks like it takes some of that screening element that you're proposing for the new structure and running it across the existing one? Is that what we're seeing?
Yes, and I think that earlier study is, we are looking at how to do exactly what you're saying as a future element on the campus. This existing garage is very close to the setback limits. This has to be a thin element that would apply. We're looking for the elements on the garage within the proposal to have a vocabulary of elements that could then be used to, again, unify all these garages in the future. So that's part of our study. The garage in the project happens to be the one farther away from you in that.
Right.
But it gives you the idea of what we're studying, which we have been looking at this whole length from our entire frontage on the freeway, something we're studying to work out the language of the e-garage.
Well, thank you for even considering going back and looking at something that's already been built.
Yeah, I just wanted to add commentary from the university on that. I think one of in terms of the iconic element, when I look at this rendering, to me, the building is actually the moment. And I remember sitting in some of those precise planning meetings, and really the intent was, when you're coming down 101, we want people to be proud they're going through Redwood City and see something really important there. And I think the Stanford Medical Office Building is really going to be iconic in itself. And because of that, I think it's better to try to neutralize the parking garages as much as possible to perhaps call a little bit more attention to that tower. And it can still be expressive, but I think somebody pointed out that when you're going at 60 miles an hour, which isn't often on 101, but when you are able to go 60 miles an hour, that is going to be a really important amount of wall that may be a lot more expressive than on one obelisk standing there that you'll probably miss.
Thanks.
Thank you. I don't have a problem with the garage being exposed as it is. There's a beautiful building behind it, but I also wonder if this viewpoint is down at the driver's field of vision, or are we up on a high bus? Do you know? Yeah, because the garage will be more prominent than what we're seeing here, but I still have to think the tower is going to take more attention away.
I drive by this a lot on 101, and every time I do, I don't.
It really bothers me.
Yeah, you just go, I go, oops, we missed that, oops, so. In fact, if you had someone comment, what's that garage for? I said, well, that's part of the Stanford campus. No, it looks like it belongs to one of the auto dealers. So anyway, sort of take that for what it's worth.
Go back to Frank Lloyd Wright, is doctors have to bury their mistakes and architects plant vines, right?
Yeah.
So maybe look at that.
If it causes you to think about that you're in a car and that's what cars rot, then I'm all for it.
Other comments? It seems like we have a pretty positive response for your proposal, and I think we can quickly move forward with approvals when you present the final submissions. If that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, however, I would, it's something we said earlier in the agenda where in study sessions, or if there are elements that you would like to bring forward to us rather than, and not carry it to an exhaustive level of detail, I would, through the chair, I would strongly suggest that staff allow the applicant to do so rather than have it be just an exhaustive, ready to go to construction documents, or actually 90% there is CDs, when in fact maybe there are some conceptual aspects that should be talked about before they get etched in stone.
Did we cover the questions that were part of staff's?
Yeah, I think you covered pretty much everything that I had. We talked about the campus landmark. I think that was the biggest thing that we need an interpretation on. And I think what I heard so far is that, from the freeway, if with the study of doing something maybe different to the parking structure, that could indicate a focal point to the campus landmark as well as the building. But then within the campus landmark, the campus loop is a more appropriate place to have a focal point. What that actually is potentially should be studied a little bit further. So that's what I heard so far. That was kind of, I think, the biggest thing. And then whether or not the interpretation of Warrington Avenue that should go all the way towards the highway, or whether you prefer sort of the campus loop orientation. And I think I heard that the preference was for the latter, was to actually have Warrington Avenue end and then have the campus loop function for patient drop-off. So those were the biggest for Block E, and I'll let Ryan comment if he wants to add anything on the Block C.
No, I think it was somewhat positive in terms of the response to Block C. just to say that it looks like you're looking at some maybe changes to the parking structure or consider some things because you might think it's a little too complicated in areas, but overall, the project was well designed.
There were a few, just in my notes, so I looked at when the master plan flashed by, there were a few sidewalks that cut across at some strange angles across public streets that may be problematic. I don't know if traffic and safety has looked at some of those things. I mean, it's one thing to carry the geometries, which I think is really cool from a planning point of view, but from a functional point of view, sometimes those become a bit awkward for driver-pedestrian interface. And then there's one other thought. Oh, just back to the turnaround. I don't know if it's worth considering. There's that fine line between defining of pedestrian space and automobile space, but sometimes creating uniform plaza materials and drive surfaces to create sort of a larger expression of a space, as opposed to this is a driveway made out of one material and this is a sidewalk out of another. I know actually the new hospital has some challenges with that, and what is actually where people can walk and where cars are, so you have to be careful about that. But maybe there's a way to unify that space to make it a larger, more simpler design for a plaza drop-off. I don't know. This is a thought. I'm wrestling with that, the Hills Oak Trees idea. Anyway.
If it's possible to see a sample of the printed wood-like texture on the metal, I understand the fire combustion code issue and wanting to kind of lengthen it, but I also think light's going to reflect off of it. I don't know, maybe it's...
Right.
And it's so minor compared to the beauty of these buildings, but I'm curious to see that. And then, Niles, would it help you to see more close-up views of each entry?
Yeah, I'm assuming that will be studied and be brought back to us with further definitions in the future. I'm sorry. Just on a personal landscaping note, are there a lot of palm trees on the existing Stanford campus? There are. Palm Drive, yeah, I guess.
So
I never really think about palm trees. When I'm on the campus, I'm always thinking about these beautiful, deciduous, large green trees and not palm trees. So I'm a little bit disturbed by some of the palm trees that continue to come before us in all of these, not just this application, but other applications, and long-term what those palm trees end up becoming, because they just keep growing and you keep trimming off branches, but you can't keep them from growing, and at some point they get really, really tall. And
Depends on the variety.
yeah, so
If I may, through the chair, so the plant species are very clearly defined as part of the precise plan. Keep in mind that these discussions happened, between prior to 2013. Palm trees are actually not identified on the precise plan, but in phase one, it was a discussion that came up. And of course, again, now because it is more of a indicator of the Stanford University, and so we allowed for some flexibility in some certain instances for the use of palm trees, but we're still discussing the species palette as a whole in line with the precise plan, but also in line with some of our stormwater requirements and drought-tolerant plants and things that maybe are more appropriate than potentially what was studied under the precise plan. So.
what seems to happen when you get a row of palm trees, they don't all seem to grow at the same height. So those nice, lovely march of palm trees end up being, oops, who put something there, and this one got really short, and so.
My name is Cheryl Barton. I'm the landscape architect for Block C and A and B before that. The other consideration, well, first of all, palm trees, there are many species of palm trees. They don't all grow tall. Some of them grow stout and stay about the same height. And we're looking at that. Those are the ones that are on Warrington now. There are different species in the fitness center garden. But let's back up a moment. David talked about the ethos of Stanford, and there are sort of three major tree species on the campus at Stanford, at the university. One is the Palo Alto, the Redwood. The second is the oak, which was the landscape that Frederick Lomstead found when he came. And the third is the palm. And the palm has been used to commemorate very specific areas on the site, gathering places. The Alumni Center, the courtyard outside there. So they're used with discretion. They're also used to line Palm Drive, which you just discussed. So it's sort of a formal gesture. And when we came to Redwood City, one of the things that we found, and I think you all know this, is that the water, the irrigation water for this particular site has chemical fluctuations that are lethal to many trees, one of them being the redwood. So we can't, of the three species from the main campus, we can't plant redwoods here because the water will destroy them. So it's an important fact to understand the design reasons for it, but also the scientific reasons for using palms or not using palms and how they're used. So they're used with discretion here, with intention.
Thanks. Any other comments? I think we can close this item then. Thank you all for coming in. Sorry about my voice. So moving on the calendar, we have, where'd that go? There we go. Matters of community interest. Attendance. Sorry I wasn't here to hear the discussion on attendance.
So we got a word from the city clerk's office that they want to see the BCC attendance policy just itemized, agendized, and addressed in all the committees and commissions. So it's nothing specific to anything going on recently or any individual member of the committee. It's more that as a kind of check mark off, they want to make sure that we address this. I know we spoke about it previously, but it was never on the actual agenda or the minutes. So if I may briefly read through this. Absences from 3 consecutive regular meetings or from more than 25% of all regular meetings over any 12 consecutive month period may result in a member being removed from BCC. Now, what does that mean? So, there are absences and there are excused absences. This policy really doesn't differentiate between the two, but, when you appeal the kind of determination, it does help. So excused absences weigh highly in your favor, and I would just say I would think it would be highly unlikely if someone experienced 3 absences, particularly excused, that they would be kicked off the board. So just wanted to kind of address that point and go through that as the clerks wanted us to do that.
So what's considered an excused absence versus?
I'm glad you asked, Chair.
Is that when we pre-arrange, as Mark has done, or?
Yeah, so there's at least one per year dedicated to personal leave, such as vacations. So at least one per year, or if or 10% of the meetings within a monthly period. There are emergencies, employment duties, military service, parental leave, religious or cultural holidays, BCC-related business, personal illness, or deaths in the family. So there's certainly some flexibility. It's more so to provide us with a heads up when you are going to be absent. That's fine, and we all know that things happen unexpectedly, and so as soon as you can let us know, obviously call 911 phone first, but then when you're in good health, make sure you let us know that you're not going to be able to make it.
I think that should also include, especially for the AAC, conflicts of interest absences.
That's a good point.
It seems to come up sometimes with amazing regularity.
Yeah, and it could be that is one of them, but yeah, that's a great point, particularly for architects. I mean, we review developments, so, naturally, there's going to be instances when those occur.
I know, Apollo, that you know that I got a letter actually saying that I was in danger, it seemed like, of being dismissed from the committee or whatever, commission. And because, as it turns out, there were only 6 meetings last year, because there just weren't that many projects and if you think of it, twice a month, we're dedicating 24 nights on Thursday night, saying that we're not going to do anything else, and we don't know until a week before or something like that. And I had double pneumonia. I was a speaker at a conference, and then I had a Achilles tendon injury, and I actually contacted the clerk and said, if you need me, I'll limp across from the parking garage, and she said it wasn't what do you call it,
We had a quorum already?
yeah, you already had a quorum. So it was kind of shocking to get that letter, and in the beginning, when you read about it, it says nothing about excused absences. So I would suggest that we add it in there.
Sounds like all of those
Yeah,
would
yeah.
be considered excused
Right.
absences,
Right.
so.
But in the beginning, it doesn't say anything about excused absences.
Oh.
Right? When you read that first statement.
That's
It
correct.
just says if you miss 2 or 3 in a row, then you're out. That just doesn't seem fair to me, so.
I'm curious as to how many times last year we weren't able to hold a scheduled session because we didn't have a quorum.
I don't have the number on the top of my head, but certainly it's been a problem in other years, particularly with this committee, to be frank with you. But I think we, particularly now that we're fully staffed, have, achieved quorums pretty much regularly.
One time you
So-
couldn't get here, remember?
Yeah. Everybody waited for an hour.
You were stuck in some sort of horrendous traffic.
Traffic.
Yeah, there was a bus burning right at the, right at 101 and Redwood Shores Parkway, and so. traffic-
We held it.
Yeah, for an hour. And I ran out of the door and I didn't have my phone with me.
Oh, no.
It was really stupid.
We were just about to wrap it up and you
And I happened to
came.
walk in, yeah.
Yeah, so just to summarize, the clerks wanted me to read out the policy, and it's been read out, and everybody's been very good about letting us know ahead of time. And it's sort of a new policy, so, both sides are still working out sort of the kinks related to it, so.
If there's an emergency, like moments before the meeting, is there a way to contact you, I guess, yourself, so we know that?
Absolutely. We're in a recorded meeting, so I won't give you my cell phone number right now.
Why not?
However.
You could send that out
you
to
just
us.
send it
right?
out.
Yeah, I'll shoot you guys an email.
And normally I would, if I'm chairing, and I would hold this at least 10 minutes beyond the 6:30 start time,
Right.
just to make sure that, maybe we set it even longer, to maybe 20 minutes for a grace period, if we think people are on their way, so we can hold applicants. It's unfair for applicants to prepare and then have to.
Particularly something like this today, where there was a
Right.
lot of members involved in the presentation. Yeah, and 6:30, being so close to traffic as opposed to some of our other meeting times, it could be understandable why people, especially traveling from distances, San Francisco, San Jose, it might be a little challenging. So, yeah, just a little bit of heads up and checking off the box that clerks wanted us to report.
Okay, thank you. So work plan check-in.
Work plan check-in, so it's a 2-year work plan. We adopted it last year, so making sure that we don't sit on this for too long. We had a couple of items that we had been discussing about. First off, sort of educational component or educational piece, working with the local AIA chapter to put something on. Next, sort of wireless standards and observing those. And then another one was discussing this idea of although it wasn't on the study session, I know it's something we brought up to council of maybe having these recordings or videos of the presentation, if not broadcasted live, then available to the public a little more accessible. So to your point about study sessions, it's something that we can address and work into the work plan somehow. So just going back through the list, the educational component, does anybody have any desire to lead that? I know I heard from John and Niles that they had some interest, or maybe I'm confusing with Mark since he's not here right now to chime in. He could
No,
always be
I'm
nominated.
interested in that.
Yeah,
I'm still involved in the AIA and stuff, so
okay.
I can be a liaison with that.
So staff will reach out and start trying to organize something, maybe spring, summer, so that we can get the ball rolling, and then I'll coordinate with the rest of the group to kind of.
I know there's the
Schedule
California chapter has a specific, I can't remember the title about, it might even go up to national about how to reach out to the community for the volunteers, the boards. It's citizen architect, I think they call it. So architects that participate in these
Right.
kinds of activities, and they support that. So there may be some resources there we can tap into. I know there are, in fact. So-
What's happening with the residential design review?
Residential design guidelines is going through the process right now. William Chu is organizing that. So, any comments, concerns, or things like that, you can reach out to him.
Is it going to be a separate committee, or is it going to be us reviewing projects, or how's that going to work? Does anybody know? Or?
So they've finished the visioning process of it, and so now I think based on the feedback that they got from Planning Commission and Council, they're kind of going back and seeing, if they need to do some more community outreach, but then also just making sure everyone's on the same page before they actually start writing the document. But I would imagine, they're aiming for July of this year for approval process, and so that will definitely go through the various committees and boards.
But who's going to be the body that's going to
That's
review
gonna,
the projects,
the plan or the project, or future projects?
future projects?
Well, it will probably still be staff level review for most of the residential architectural permits as it is today. We actually only have an architectural permit for second stories. So anything that's like a single story addition or an ADU would just
Right.
get a building permit. But of course, planners would still be checking it against the adopted residential.
A lot of other
guidelines.
communities, they have a area like 3,000 square feet or something like that, or
Yeah, they do, but Redwood City does not.
I'm just wondering if it'd be something that to be considered. But
Yeah, at this time, I'm not sure that we'd be observing that. We just went through an FAR ordinance process, and there was some discussion there in terms of level of review. I would also say that the state has become more active in things such as multifamily development and leaning towards objective design standards. So areas where we really do have discretion, single-family homes, I think we're trying to focus on at this time, and those are typically processed at the staff level.
What about planning commission joint study sessions? Is there more scheduled at this point? I think both planning commission and us said we wanted to continue that dialogue as part of our work plan.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that probably be ad hoc, associated with a particular policy initiative. We did one previously for missing middle. So things like residential design guidelines, those are opportunities for that. However, the direction that particular policy goes is still, again, we just completed the visioning process and trying to work that out. So as we find areas and policies where we can have joint study sessions, certainly we'd explore that, but there's none on tap right
Okay.
now. Going next to wireless standards, and I'll wrap up this work plan check-in. Probably looking at the summer for bringing that to AAC. As you know, there's a lot of wireless proposals within the right-of-way, which the city has kind of limited discretion over. The state has been very active in promoting that, as it has the FCC. And we have been reaching out to PG&E regarding what their minimum requirements are, because although we can have our own idea of what the design standards would be, if PG&E requirements don't line up with that, then there's an issue. So looking forward to summer 2020, speaking about wireless.
Is this for equipment that is being mounted in some fashion?
Yeah, typically on utility poles or new streetlights.
Because I know that there are a whole bunch of different private and pseudo-private players in that deal. Because there is, like on Redwood Shores, there's a tower, and it used to be old AT&T equipment that Verizon was then going to come and remove their equipment and put their equipment in place. And so they had to deal with Public Works here, as well as Redwood Shores Modifications Committee, and as well as their own public utilities regulations. And so there's just a whole lot of stuff about who's right of way and what goes in it and who has the right to that pole.
Yeah, there's a lot to unravel with those and several different jurisdictions involved. I think particularly what we're considering is more almost street furniture or urban design. So situations like that where it's on the tower, it's on within the trusses, it's not really visible from the public street. We're thinking more about items that you come in contact with every day, street lights, signal lights, utility poles, ways of hiding it within street furniture. And we anticipate in 2020 there to be a much larger volume of new antennas within the right-of-way. So trying to get ahead of the curve a little bit here, as although the regulations passed in late 2018 and were adopted by the city in 2019, I think there's been some delay in 5G right-of-way wireless just because the rollout is very complicated and quite frankly involves PG&E. So we'll probably be discussing that this summer, and I'll provide everybody with an update when available.
Fake palm trees.
Fake palm trees.
Speaking of streetlights, as a comment, just general comment, that the new LED lamps are so bright that they really affect, I think, the retrofit of the existing street lamps are not shielded enough.
Yeah.
Because it takes away way too much night vision, and there's not enough perceived light getting down to the pavement because it's so bright above. I end up driving with my visor down just so I could block out. And we had a community who was looking to replace their streetlights without the shielding or the cutoff, and it made a huge difference once they put in the fixture that did have a better cutoff than just replacing the lamp.
Yeah, and that's certainly one of those items where we could look at when we're discussing this, light pollution, shielding, street design, because a lot of times they have to replace poles. And, that's all in sort of the spirit of giving the committee a heads up, much like with matter of committee interest item C, future agenda items. So March 5th, we have a tentative date. Ryan, now that you're back in the room, would you like to discuss?
Yes, so project reviewed in December, actually the last meeting, is coming back with some modifications to that plan. This is the 557 East Bay Shore project. So they've made some enhancements, and I'll be presenting that. And so we'll have basically a second public hearing with the public invited as well, similar to the first meeting.
So this is the Villa Sport complex with the multifamily, the water slide, and next to the freeway.
Is it a study session, or is it?
It is a second study session. It was felt that another one was necessary after the last one.
And I trust the applicant heard us about not taking things to a construction document level of investment, so to speak.
Sure. I think they're going to make more of an effort to kind of explain how they got to where they are.
They did reach out, and I met with them.
Right.
The staff It's just a study session and talked about further my comments and obviously saying that it did in any way give them any direction per se that, and also I think they reached out and were looking to maybe talk to some other committee members. I don't know if
I have had a bunch of deadlines. I replied back that I could not meet with them before the 5th.
Okay.
And certainly something to disclose during the meeting itself. Yeah, on March 5th. March 19th, I believe, being the next possible AAC date. We anticipate having 2 items tentatively. One being Twin Dolphin over in the Redwood Shores. It's a 5-story office building. I've spoken about this previously. This has been going through the review of the Shores Business Center Association. So I know we discussed, bringing projects in a little earlier, but given that this have a 2-track process, finding an area where we could bring it to AAC, get someone from the Shores to discuss the project and their review so far, and kind of go through and review the project.
On a jurisdictional basis, if we have conflicting directions to the applicant or concerns about, or comments about where we'd like to see the project go, and it differs with the Redwood Shores Business Group, who takes precedent, or does it matter? I don't want to leave the applicant with having to solve possibly 2 disparate directions.
Well, which is why we want to have someone from the SBCA present during this meeting. I mean, I think one of the good things that we've discussed is reaching a consensus and having this sort of consensus building group all in one room to have this discussion with city staff members, myself, the developer, SBCA, and the AAC to sort of hash through all that. So I don't anticipate there being any conflicts there, because there's a little bit of overlap between city regulations and the SBCA guidelines.
And that's how it's worked in the past. We used to hear literally the discussions that went on before were presented to us why it was the way it was based on, so we could take that into consideration and then
Absolutely.
work through it.
And that second item of the day would probably be Wells Fargo. They're trying to locate at 2075 Broadway, the newly created building here on Broadway and Jefferson. They have a corner tenant space. Part of the downtown precise plan has guideline deviations, so they would be coming to the AAC seeking deviations from these guidelines prior to the next steps of approval.
And does that open up their current site for development?
That's perhaps a question you can ask the developer.
I thought I saw something about that.
So
That funny shaped lot being proposed for something.
So if we have an account with Wells Fargo, we don't have to recuse ourselves, I assume.
I'll check in with the city attorney's office, but I don't believe your checking and savings disqualify you.
So
Yeah,
is
that
that
was
it
a
for
fun
the matters of community interest? Any other thoughts? Do I hear a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
A second?
Seconded?
We are, all those in favor, aye? We're adjourned. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
And John, thank you for coming, in spite of the fact that you're not feeling well. Really
Sorry
appreciate
about
it.
that, it's an important.
I know how hard that is.
Are you getting better, or?
I think I'm getting better. My voice was completely gone yesterday, so, which some people consider a blessing. but-
Take another day or 2 off.
Yeah, I don't think.
Take tomorrow off and then